a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Who really discovered coffee? I hear about that goat herder all the time, but his story is relatively recent creation, sometime long after people were drinking the elixir of the gods. Folks have found ancient coffee plants in Ethiopia that are dated to sometime around 1200 years ago. This doesn't mean they were drinking coffee, only that the plants were there. I do prefer the Ethiopian blend from Organic Man Coffee Trike because, well, I like how it tastes. I can't put this into words. Some people like the Brazilian blend. It's all up to how those tiny little taste buds react when being bathed in the rich black gold. Find out for yourself what real coffee tastes like by swinging by 4501 McPherson and having a few cups. If the drive is well over a few hours, you can visit organicmancoffeetrike.shop and treat your tongue to some of the best coffee in the universe. When I put out the announcement for the show, I put the date on. I was very careful to say it was going to be on the 13th for y'all listening on Arkanasa. Me and Facebook seem to have some kind of issues here lately because I'll post something and I'll be very careful about the date, and then I'll go look later on and the date will be different. The robots that run Facebook are having some kind of weird issues here lately. It seems like about every other time I try to like something that someone said, I'm told I can't use that feature so they can prevent spam. I've already been in Facebook jail about 5, 6 times that I know of, that I can remember. Wonder what's going on over there. Have the robots taken over the site? Maybe it's just me. I was relaxing the other night watching TV before slipping off into unconsciousness, and The Truth Is Out There was on. I usually don't watch this show, but a friend of mine, Ken Gerhardt, is on sometimes, and I wanted to see what they might have for him to say. The idea of the phantom time from the Middle Ages came up in the show. I've known about this missing 300 years for some time now, but I never got around to looking into it. Then they rolled out the experts with their over the top explanations, and I started to get a little more interested. Not in what they had to say, but what they didn't bother to go into. The old "don't think outside the box if you want your career to bloom" came to mind. Oh, yes, they didn't bother to ask Ken anything about this idea. He's more into the cryptids and ghosts. The experts all did their best to debunk the missing 300 years without really building a good case as far as I'm concerned. Yes, I am not a historian. I never went to any big name college, or any colleges for that matter, other than community college. I don't have a piece of paper hanging on the wall with my name on it and a bunch of letters after it. I have done some reading, and so here is my take on the missing 300 years. I didn't think at first there was going to be enough to do a show on the subject. I don't want anyone to think I really know these things. I can only read what's out there and come to my own conclusions. If you want to be a citizen scientist, that's how you do it. Do a little research, come to a conclusion on your own. Stop letting other people drive your brain for you. I can only give my opinion. I can tell you what I've read, and that's about it. James Lowell said, "A sliver of experience is better than a forest full of trees." Somebody else said that every PhD knows where the library is. They seldom actually get outside and look around. Really, what they know is what somebody else wrote down for them to read. Kind of the same thing that I get a lot. What experience I have is dealing with government bureaucrats who want their agenda proven no matter how badly they have to fudge the numbers. During certain operations in the Border Patrol, such as Operation Iron Horse, boy, they do love those fancy names. They said that finding aliens hidden on trains was going to be the main focus. We were supposed to search all trains leaving town. They also said any aliens encountered within 10 miles of a train was just going to be assumed that that's where they were headed. So any aliens caught within 10 miles of the train tracks was captured on the train. That encompasses just about our entire sector. The boys in the rear with the gear could then tell Washington that we had apprehended hundreds of people on the train, most of who were not even thinking about riding it. The phantom time hypothesis came about from Herbert Illig, a German publisher and amateur historian who gained attention following the publication of his 1996 book, Das Erfunden Mittelalter, Die Größte. No, it's all in German. The translation is The Invented Middle Ages, the greatest time falsification in history. I recently discovered that both sides of my family actually came from Germany. All this time, I was led to believe that half of my ancestors were French. Nay, nay. They came from the Rhine Valley. I speak maybe 10 words of German, and I probably mispronounce those. And I probably use them for the wrong things. No one in the family spoke German. In fact, the ones who arrived in 1895 wanted little to nothing to do with Germans or Germany. Well, that's what I heard from a reliable source anyway, one of my cousins. During his investigation, Illig compared the dating of the Julian calendar introduced by Julius Caesar in 45 BC to the currently used Gregorian calendar, which was introduced by Pope Gregory the 13th in the year of our Lord 1582. Illig said his calculations showed that some 297 years appeared to be missing. He argued these missing years were secretly added as a part of a plot hatched by Pope Sylvester II and the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III. Living during the 8th century AD, these medieval elites wanted to speed up time so that their respective reigns would correspond to the year 1000, exactly 1 millennium since Jesus Christ was born. I've often wondered why a millennium is 1,000 instead of 1,000,000. A, mil- a millennium is defined as a period of 1,000 years based on the Latin word mille, which means 1,000. The term was established in historical content in relation to calendar systems and significant events, such as the transition from one millennium to another. The word for a millennium The word for 1,000,000 years is mega year, which is defined as 1,000,000 years. The prefix mega means large or great. And of course, you know what a year is. To hide their tinkering from future generations, Otto and Sylvester employed scribes to create and copy medieval manuscripts detailing fictitious events and individuals. After being distributed to all the monasteries and libraries across Europe, these manuscripts would be mistaken for actual history. Among their fabrications, Illig said, were such famous historical figures as Charlemagne, a king of the Franks, and the founder of Europe, Alfred the Great, the king of England who drove the Vikings away. Illig isn't the only writer to call the Middle Ages an invention. His Eurocentric version of the phantom time hypothesis exists, but so does the Russocentric one. Propagated by Moscow State University mathematician Professor Anatoly Fomenko, it said that classical Greek and imperial Rome, dynast- dyn- dynastic China, pharaonic Egypt, and other ancient societies actually existed during the Middle Ages, and that civilization didn't actually get going, well, modern civilization, until the 800 AD. Flamenco adjusted calendar creates a different version of the past, one in which the New Testament is written before the Old Testament. The Trojan War and the Crusades were during the same time frame, and Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun were the same person. The boys in the white lab coats rushed out, declaring all of these notions not just wrong, but lies. Some did admit that the phantom timeline hypothesis contained a kernel of truth. Things like the vast majority of early medieval manuscripts are either copies of lost originals or outright false, casting doubt on some, if not all, of their details. The European calendar has been revised on multiple occasions, with many a mathematically inclined monk tramping through the history of the country as if it didn't matter when things happened or who did them. As much of history, particularly ancient and medieval history, was written by the victors. All historical accounts must be studied with a healthy dose of scrutiny and skepticism, and taken with a grain of salt, calendars included. Actually, history is not written by the victors, as some would have you believe. At the end of World War II, a particular car manufacturer handed out huge quantities of money to the folks in Congress so that they would grant him sole rights to tell the world what just happened. And never mind all those men that were actually involved in the fighting and shooting. This man had spent the entire war safe and sound in the U.S., but he did own a few vehicle manufacturing plants deep inside the Nazi held territories, where slave labor was forced to build his vehicles. I see why he would want to tell the history of what just happened because anybody else might have pointed out his nastiness. Allies won the war, but this guy wrote the history. History tends to repeat itself mostly as new generations forget what has happened, or they've been told a replacement history. Add to this the fact that a lot of people tell us things happened that didn't happen and that things that did happen didn't. Things like, did Germany have an atomic bomb? Just little things like that. How about the fact that old Chris and the whole nonsense about the Europeans thinking the world was flat? That was actually written by some guys in the 1800s who were trying to give the church a bad name. In order to get around the big problem on all those forged and middle aged documents, the boys in the white lab coats point to Asia, the Middle East, and Africa as sources of chronological accuracy. They also tell us evidence of missing centuries can be found in nature. Tree rings chronicle the passage of time, and ancient and medieval documentation of astronomical events like solar eclipses show that their observers lived in different periods. Could this be just fiction written to make the whole missing time paradox go away? Or was there a certain effort to make us believe the Middle Ages did in fact happen? Just think to yourself about all the times we've been lied to about things that happened in relatively recent times, only to find out later the true story when somebody is either about to die or their family finds evidence after the fact. Historians are at a loss to explain why, at around the end of the 1500s, all of Europe went into some kind of a vegetative state, while the rest of the planet was thriving. The phantom time hypothesis tries to explain a period when European society stagnated while others flourished, and is supported by the Russian stagnation theory. The history of civilization began with the birth of Russia's parent state, the fiefdom known as Kievan Rus. The name Russia has its origins in medieval state known as Rus, which was established in the ninth century. The people of Rus were Slavic and inhabited the region around present-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The origin of the name Rus is said to have derived from an old Norse word that meant to row. This is because the early inhabitants of Rus had to pay taxes to the Vikings, who were known as the Rus. The Vikings were known for their expertise in navigating waterways, using boats to travel, and then beat the heck out of anybody that had money. Instead of examining what Illig had to say, the folks who know everything began referring to the missing time as a conspiracy theory. How many of those have been proven to be true here lately? I think we're up to something like 42 to 0. You know what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth? About 6 months. Kind of name was used to draw attention away from the theory. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. That's what I do. Anytime somebody tells me, don't look at this, it's just going to make me want to look. You would think if Phantom Time was just made up to sell books and confuse people, it would be a simple matter to show it's not true. However, scientists find it is very difficult to dispute the information being presented. Despite its sheer implausibility, the hypothesis has proven to be very difficult to refute. It's not like the flat earth where you've got pictures that show a sphere. They just can't seem to prove the missing time actually happened. After being treated to the concept the folks living in Europe didn't bathe, the Gulf of Tonkin incident happened. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. I'm not going to say anything about the moon landing that might not have happened. George Washington's wooden teeth, how about? He had real teeth. They just weren't his own. Things people tell us as being facts, only to discover there's something rotten in Denmark. In Shakespeare's Hamlet, while looking for a ghost on the battlements, Marcellus says, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Then there's the book, Something Rotten, which is the fifth Thursday next in the series by Jasper Fforde. He quotes a lot of old books, and it helps to know at least something about the classics. In the TV show, The Proof is Out There, the experts say things like, the Chinese calendar shows there is no missing time. They also reference the Middle East and Africa as sources of chronological proof and there being no missing time. The Chinese calendar is a lunisolar calendar rather than a lunar one, which takes the cycle of the moon phases and the cycles of the earth. They make a synodic month as the length of the month, incorporating elements of a 24 solar term of the stem branch calendar. I had to read this several times and I still don't understand it, but their calendar has a base of 24 solar terms. The Chinese lunar calendar can reflect the changes of the seasons, guide farming, and things like that. It contains both lunar and solar calendar elements. That's why it's called a lunisolar calendar. Some of these people really like to use strange wordings in their articles. The Chinese calendar takes into account the relationship between the sun, the moon, and the earth. The lunar calendar is regardless of the earth's orbit around the sun and cannot reflect the seasons since there's no fixed time change in the seasons. Different from the solar calendar, which is 365 or 366 days, the lunar year sometimes differs with the solar year by a month in terms of days. In order to coordinate the number of days between the solar year and the lunar year, the lunisolar calendar, the Chinese calendar, includes common years and leap years. A common year is 12 months, while a leap year has 13. A month can be 30 days long or it can be 29 days. The average calendar month is equal to the synodic month. The long and the short months are decided by calculation. This is done by adding 24 solar terms to the calendar and adding 7 leap years in each 19 lunar years. There is one extra leap month in a leap year. Thus, the year has 383 to 385 days to make the average number of days in a lunar year in line with a typical year. As a result, the Chinese lunar calendar corresponds both to the phases of the moon, the periodic motion of the Earth around the sun. Several competing lunar solar calendars were introduced during a lot of the battles that took place in China, especially by states fighting against Zhou control during the 475 BC to 221 BC. From these warring state periods, 6 different calendar systems are known to have been begun and developed, which didn't align with each other at all. In 1929, the nationalist government tried to ban the traditional Chinese calendar. The Kuoming calendar published by the government no longer listed the dates of Chinese calendar holidays or significant dates. Chinese people were used to this traditional calendar, and many traditional customs were based on Chinese calendar. The ban failed and was lifted in 1934. The Republic of China calendar, published by the Beiyang government of the Republic of China, still listed the dates of the Chinese calendar in addition to the Gregorian calendar. It was like a hodgepodge mix of the two. Despite the Chinese calendar losing its place as the country's official calendar in the 20th century, it is still being used by many today. With all these changes and different calendars being replaced as different governments took power, there's no real way to align the Chinese calendar with the European calendar. There could be more than 300 years missing without any way of proving or disproving. The Islamic calendar dating system is used for religious purposes. Each month begins approximately around the new moon. Approximately. The months are alternately 30 and 29 days long, except for the 12th Du al Hijjah, which is uh, which varies depending on a 30-year cycle, which is intended to keep the calendar in step with the phases of the moon. That's their version of a leap year. In 11 years of this cycle, this particular calendar has 30 days, and in others, 19 years, it has 29. Thus, the year has either 354 or 355 days. No other leap day or months are intercalculated so that the named months do not remain in the same seasons, but they're retrograded through the entire solar or seasonal year. The experts made reference to the African calendar. Now, I'm guessing they must have meant northern Africa because most of the southern parts of the continent didn't have traditional calendars. They used local forms of tracking the years for agricultural purposes. Now, they didn't bother to name years, months, or days. It was just, whatever the day looked like. A lot of the northern countries used the Islamic calendar. Then there's that Mayan calendar, which consists of several cycles or counts of different lengths. The 260-day count is known to scholars as the Solcan. The Solcan was combined with a 365-day Vogue solar year known as the Hab to form a synchronized cycle that lasted 52 Hab, called the calendar round. The calendar round is still in use by many groups in Guatemalan highlands. A different calendar was used to track longer periods of time and for the inscription of calendar dates. This is the long count. It is a count of days since the mythological starting point. According to correlation between the long count and the Western calendars accepted by a majority of the Mayan researchers, this starting point is about August 11th, 3114 BC in the Gregorian calendar or September 6th of the Julian calendar. The Greenwich Mean Time correlation was chosen by John Eric Sidney in 1935 on the basis of earlier correlations by Joseph Goodman in 1905. Juan Martinez Hernandez in 1926 and Thomas himself in 1927. By its linear nature, the long count was capable of being extended to refer to any date far into the past or future. This calendar involved the use of positional notational system in which each position signified an increasing multiple of the number of days. If you understood any of that, please tell me. It went way beyond my pay grade. The Mayan numerical system was essentially vigesimal or based on 20, and each unit of a given position represented 20 times the unit of the position which preceded it. Unlike the the system used in Europe, which is based on 10, theirs was based on 20. An important exception was made for the second order place value, which instead of representing 18 times 20, or 360 days, they used 20 times 20, which equaled 400 days. The cycles of the long count are independent of the solar calendar. Many Mayan long count inscriptions contain a supplemental series which provides information on the lunar phase, number of current lunations in a series of 6, of which 9 lords of the night's rule. Less prevalent or poorly understood cycles, combinations, and calendar progressions were also tracked. A 819-day count is attested in a few inscriptions. Repeating sets of 9 days associated with different groups of deities, animals, and other significant concepts are also known. Remember all that hoo-ha back in 2015 about the coming apocalypse? You did see Road Warrior, right? Anyway, folks were coming out with books and movies saying the end of the world was going to be December 21st, 2012. This was based on a misunderstanding of the Mayan calendar. Even the Mayan elders were saying that this was not how it was done. But who are you going to believe? The scholars who read a book or two in a library at college? Or the people that actually lived under the calendar system? Not even the elders know exactly how to align their calendars with the ones used in Europe. Once again, there could be a few hundred years missing somewhere in there, since the two do not actually line up. As empires rise, conquer, and then fall, one thing they all seem bent on doing is eliminating any records left by the vanquished. Even here in the US, during the Manifest Destiny, people were sent out west not to find Indian artifacts and structures, but to destroy them so the settlers coming along behind wouldn't know that anyone had been there before them. Why do you think so many artifacts have been shipped off to the Smithsonian only to vanish? A lot of artifacts were dumped into the ocean, trying to make the past go away. The Smithsonian actually admitted to this a while ago, and then they immediately pulled the article from the internet because I guess it was released without proper authority from the overlords. The destruction of libraries has gone on all over the world in just about every so called civilized country. In 376, a large migration of Goths and other non Roman folks fleeing from the Huns entered the Empire of Rome. Rome forces were unable to exterminate, expel, or subjugate these folks. In 395, after winning two destructive civil wars, Theodosius I died. He left a collapsing field army and the empire divided between warring ministers and his two incompetent sons. Goths and other non Romans became a force that could challenge either part of the empire. The further barbarian groups crossed the Rhine and other frontiers. The armed forces of Western Empire became few and ineffective, and despite a brief recovery, the central rule was never again effectively consolidated. That's why Rome fell. Does this sound like something that is going on today? Something that has happened recently that has divided many countries? Flood countries with millions of foreigners, overwhelm the system, and then seize power. Too many politicians are playing the short game. What is in this for me? How can I get out of Congress with several $1 million in an off-sea bank account somewhere? There are huge groups of people out there that are willing to play the long game. It might be generations before the outcome is what they're looking for, but they are taught that this is the only thing that matters. Kill yourself today so that people living 100 years down the road can claim the entire planet. The fall of the Western Roman Empire, also called the fall of Rome, was the loss of central political control in the Western Roman Empire, a process in which the empire failed to enforce its rule, and its vast territory was divided among several successive politis, polities. I can't even pronounce that word. Polities, or groups of like minded people. The Roman Empire lost the strength that allowed it to exercise effective control over the western provinces. This was allowed by the old, there are barbarians at the gate, demanding admittance, which was the end of Rome. Remember what they say, those who fail to remember history. After the fall of Western Rome in 476 AD, Europe fell into a period known as the Dark Ages. It was It was said to last for nearly 1,000 years, and from the early portion of this period, very little literature survived. There were also few significant scientific or cultural developments during the early Middle Ages, lending support to the idea that perhaps they were simply made up. The skeleton history that Otto and his co-conspirators put together to cover this period could explain why the early Middle Ages had so long a period of time where nothing happened. The power wielded by the church at this time can also not be underestimated. His literature was not widespread and mechanical clocks hadn't been invented. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that Otto and the Pope had the power and the means to deceive the masses. The only people in Europe who could read, not just the contents of a box of cereal, but a real book, something long and studious like Red Side Story. The folks who could read were either the royals, who had a vast interest in not letting anyone know what's going on, and members of the church. The folks doing all the writing had a real interest in doing as they were told. The Inquisition was still going strong, and the possibility of finding yourself before them was on everybody's mind. If somebody were to simply whisper you were a heretic, there was no need of any proof, only an accusation. You never knew who might be pointing the finger your way, and you would never be told. You would never expect the Spanish Inquisition. Further intrigue comes when looking more closely at Pope Gregory the XIII's decision in 1582 to switch the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. The Gregorian calendar is a solar dating system and the most widely used calendar in the modern world. It replaced the Julian calendar as it better reflected the time it takes the Earth to go around the Sun, 365.25 days. It achieves this through a more accurate way of calculating the leap years. To align the new calendar with the solar year, 10 days were just omitted. The number of extra days the Julian calendar had accrued since inception in 45 BC. The phantom time hypothesis argues the year 45 BC, the Julian calendar, should have accrued 13 extra days, not 10. If that were the case, then the omission of 10 days implies the Julian calendar was actually in effect from about 340 years less than expected between 45 BC and 1582 AD. There was an archaeological conference in Munich, Germany in 1986, which discussed only the overwhelming amount of documents that were not as old as the dates on them said, or pertained to things that never happened. Documents with forged dates, forged names of people, forged agreements, forged history. Just about every aspect of life in the Dark Ages was open to falsification. Seeing as all documents were written by members of, well, the church, this meant the folks running things must have known something was rotten in Europe. Having the power to simply write out a deed to a particular abundant piece of land, showing it really belongs to some monastery and therefore the church, would have been too much of a temptation. telling about some heroic king or prince who did wonderful things for the people of Europe might have been just a story to make people think there were actually good people running things and not just a bunch of inbred royals. It might have started with something small, mostly innocent scroll work. And just say we own that little piece of land where those grapes grow. The slippery slope catches everybody that tries it. Illig was at the conference where the documents were being looked into. It got him to thinking what else might have been written down but never actually happened. He wondered why the church would go to all this trouble to forge documents hundreds of years ago before they would have been useful. And he conducted research, which ultimately developed the phantom timeline hypothesis. Is there really something to this idea, or is it yet just another half baked theory? The naysayers will tell you there isn't enough evidence to support the missing 300 years. However, these same naysayers don't do a very good job of proving their own case. When it comes to understanding some of our past, it gets blurred by people who want things to be a certain way and are willing to bend or outright break things to get their way. When dealing with calendars, things get a little blurry. The Gregorian calendar was never intended or purported to bring the new calendar in line with the Julian calendar as it existed in 45 BC. It was existence in as it existed in 325, the time of the Council of Nicaea. By the time of this introduction, the astronomical equinox was occurring on March 10th in the Julian calendar, but Easter was still being calculated for the date March 20th, 10 days difference. The folks trying to debunk the phantom time showed a photograph of tree rings and claimed that this proved the 300 years were there. I understand how dendrochronology works. You cut a piece of wood open and then you count the rings. You can tell how old the tree is based on how many rings you see. As for what year the tree was growing, you can guess at the age by the width of the rings. During exceptionally dry years, the rings are very narrow. When the fertilizer fairies arrive, the rings are fat. Still, this is mostly a guess because we don't know everything there is about what was going on hundreds of years ago. We only have those same scholars, the ones suspected of all those forgeries, to answer our question. The tree rings can show how old a tree is and give a guesstimate as to how old the tree was, but it's still a guess. Knowing how old the tree was when it was cut down only gives us the age of the tree, not things going on around it as it grew. We don't know when it started to grow. Aristotle wrote that the Arcadia in Greece, before being inhabited by the Hellenes, had a population of Pelasgians, and that these aboriginals occupied the land already before there was a moon in the sky. Uh, they were called the Proselenists. Apollonius of Rhodes mentioned the time when not all the orbs were yet in the heavens, before the Dani and the Deucalion race came into existence, and only the Arcadians lived, of whom it is said they dwelt on mountains and fed on acorns before there was a moon. Plutarch wrote in the Roman Questions, there were Arcadians of Evanders following the so-called pre-lunar people. Similarly, Ovid said, the Arcadians are said to have possessed their land before the birth of Jove, and the folks are older than the moon. Hippolytus referred to a legend that Arcadia brought forth Pelasgus of greater antiquity than the moon. Lucian, in his astrology, says that the Arcadians affirm in their folly that they are older than the moon. Censoronus also alluded to the time before there was a moon in the sky. Some allusions to the time before there was a moon may be found also in the scriptures. Job 25:5. The grandeur of the Lord who makes peace in the heights is praised, and the time is mentioned before there was a moon and it did not shine. Also in Psalm 72:5 it said, thou wast feared since the time of the sun and before the time of the moon. A generation of generations means a very long time. Kind of like how 40 days and 40 nights does not mean more than 39 and less than 41. It means a longer period of time than a few weeks, but not quite a year. You can't use a literal translation because Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic don't translate word for word to English. Add to this, they weren't big on punctuation or word for word structure. Scholars have to guess at where the sentences, paragraphs, and chapters end or begin. The memory of a moon without The memory of a world without a moon lives on in oral tradition amongst the Indians as well. The Indians of Bogota Highlands and eastern Cordilleras of Colombia relate some of their tribal reminiscences to the time before there was a moon. In the earliest times when the moon was not yet in the heavens. The boys in the white lab coats don't like unanswered questions. If they don't know, they seem more than willing to make things up. They call these theories, like the theory of evolution that they try to hammer into our brains in school. It's still just a theory. They try to tell us there are several ways the moon came into being. Some are downright comical. Some will tell us the moon originated at the same time as the Earth, being formed substantially from the same material. This is why the moon isn't as old or is older, depending on who you ask, than the Earth. Scientists cannot agree on is the moon older or newer than the Earth. The moon was formed not in the vicinity of the Earth, but in a different part of the solar system and was captured by the Earth's gravitation. If this was true, it could explain the absence of the moon and some of the stories that are being told. The moon was originally a portion of the Earth and was torn out when a meteorite impacted the area that is now the Pacific Ocean. Well, this would mean that the moon is made from the same substance as the Earth, but moon rocks brought back from the moon landing, the ones that really did happen, should all be made from the same stuff as our planet, yet moon rocks are way different from Earth rocks. All three theories claim the presence of the moon on an orbit around the Earth for billions of years. This would mean that people have been on the Earth for billions of years as well. The boys in the white lab coats say, nay, nay, man has only been around for about 6 million years. They know this because they found the first ever birth certificate dated to 6 million years ago. Okay, not really, but they do make some wild claims. Since mankind on both sides of the Atlantic preserved the memory of a time when the Earth was without a moon, the first hypothesis, namely that the moon originated at the same time as the Earth, it doesn't hold any water. We have seen that traditions of diverse people often corroborate testimony to the effect that in a very early age, but still in the memory of mankind, no moon was in the sky. Since human beings already populated the earth, it is improbable that the moon sprang from it. If there had to have been some kind of a really nasty earth-shaking event if it did, and that may have wiped out mankind. There is no evidence to suggest the moon was a planet or a satellite from another planet, or a comet at the time of its capture by the Earth. Whatever atmosphere it may have had, if at all, was ripped away when it was captured by the Earth's gravity. Either it was sucked into the Earth's atmosphere or it simply dispersed into the space. Since the time the moon began to accompany the Earth, it underwent the influence of contact with comets and planets that passed near the Earth in subsequent ages. The mass of the moon being less than that of the Earth, the moon must have suffered great disturbances in cosmic contact. That's why the dark side of the moon has so many craters on it. The variations in the position of the moon can be read in variations in the length of the month. The length of the month repeatedly change in subsequent catastrophic events, and for this there exists a large amount of supporting evidence. In Greek mythology, there are stories dealing with these events. Zeus in the Iliad advised Aphrodite to stay out of the battle in which Athens and Ares were the main contestants. Athens and Ares were also known as Venus and Mars. Scholars believe this was referring to the planets, or these two these two planets were trying to steal the moon away from the Earth. The moon is 4.46 billion years old, according to some new studies done by scientists at the Field Museum and the University of Glasgow. The Earth is said to be 4.54 years old. Well, I checked several different scientific websites and I got several answers, all different and all espousing to be the correct answer. Some said the moon is older than the Earth. Others said the Earth is older than the moon, just adding confusion to the matter. If you ask a dozen scientists how old the Earth and the moon are, you may get a dozen different answers. There's no proof one way or the other. Ask a dozen scientists about the calendar, and most of them are going to say that we are living in the year 2025. I don't think they say this because they have any proof. I think they say this because they don't want to be ridiculed and have all kinds of nasty names thrown at them for saying something different. Think outside the box, they say, and then they yell at us when we try to. Does it really matter if 300 years were misplaced back in the 16th century? Not unless you're looking at the Mayan calendar and trying to figure out when the end of the earth was going to happen. It also means a lot of those people who try to lay claim to other countries based on the fact that hundreds of years ago they invaded the place and now they have a legitimate right to return. If you're playing the short game, only concerned with how things will affect you, it doesn't matter. If you're playing the long game, it can matter a lot. Certain dates hold a lot of meaning to certain people. For example, September 11th, 1683. The Ottoman Empire was winning during the Battle of Vienna. The next morning, along comes John the Third Sobieski of Poland, along with a huge pissed off army, and they kind of pounded the Turks into a bloody mess. This was also the introduction of coffee into Europe and the spark that ignited the Industrial Revolution. How about that map of Antarctica, showing it without ice? Scientists tell us 34 million years ago, Antarctica wasn't an icy desert. They also say that humans have only been here for 6 million years. Show them the Piri-Reis map and they run out of the room screaming. Yes, the material the map is drawn on is not 34 million years old. Reis himself said that he drew the map using older maps, which had also been drawn from older maps. It was a recreation of a recreation of a recreation. Yet, when you look at the map, the Piri-Reis map, it is surprisingly very accurate, showing Antarctica without any ice. The boys in the white lab coats line up, holding hands, yelling, Red Rover, No, they line up and they say that Herbert Illig didn't know what he was talking about. And they keep yelling, it's just a conspiracy theory. Why all the fuss? I'd never owned any land in Europe back in the 16th century. My family was not landed. They probably had to borrow money just to be called poor. There's no way of finding out who was cheated out of their property. The records are all long gone or they've all been changed. It doesn't matter. Some of our history looks bad, and some folks can't abide by their families being criticized for anything. Folks like the Royals, who can trace their descendants all the way back to Jesus and claim him as a family member. The long and the short of this is we have to ask questions. There can be questions without answers, but not answers without questions. Just because some guy with a bunch of letters behind his name says that we're living in the year 2025 shouldn't keep us from at least asking, are you sure? Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, spread it around. Tell folks they should be listening to the show as well. I am still trying to get a few stories for my most recent book. Anything dealing with UFOs, cryptids, ghosts, or anything weird that you may have seen or heard about. As long as they're true stories and not just something you heard on the radio or TV. If you do have a story and you'd like to share it with me, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Till next week, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
coming to the tree, where there strung up a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.